beautiful people. I'm gonna be reading Pride and Prejudice, Volume 3, Chapter 1. Let's start now. Elizabeth, as they drove along, watched for the first appearance of Pemberley Woods with some pre. Wait, let me look it up. Let me look up this word.
Perturbation.
Perturbation. And when at length they turned in at the log, her spirits were in a high flutter.
Flutter.
Flutter. The park was a very large and contained great variety of ground, and they entered it in one of its lowest points, and drove for some time through a beautiful wood, stretching over a wide intent. Elizabeth's mind was too full for conversation, but she saw and admired every remarkable spot and point of view. They gradually ascended for half a mile, and then found themselves at the top of a considerable eminence. Let me look up this one. Eminence. Eminence.
Eminence.
Eminence, where the word ceased, and the eyes were instantly caught by Pemberley House, situated on the opposite side of a valley into which the road with some abruptness wound. It was a large, handsome stone building, standing well on rising ground and backed by a red
Ridge.
ridge of high wood woody hills, and in front of a stream of natural importance was swelled into greater, but without any artificial appearance. Its banks were neither formal nor falsely adorned. Elizabeth was delighted. She had never seen a place for which nature had done more, or where natural beauty had been so little counteracted by an awkward taste. They were all of them warm in their admiration, and at their moment she felt that to be mistress of Pemberley must must be something. They descended the hill, crossed the bridge, and drove to the door, and while examining the nearer aspect of the house, all her comprehensions of meeting its owner returned. She dreaded lest the chambermaid had mistaken on applying to see who's sticking to like the flip. On applying to see the place, they were admitted into the hall. Elizabeth, as they waited for the housekeeper, had leisure to wonder at her being where she was. The housekeeper came, a respectable looking elderly lady, much less fine fine and more civil, and she had any notion of finding her. They followed her into the dining parlour. It was a large, well proportioned room, handsomely fitted up. Elizabeth, after slightly savoring it, went to a window to enjoy its prospect. The hill, crowned with woods from which they had descended, receiving increased abruptness from the distance, was a beautiful object. Every disposition of the ground was good, and she looked on the whole scene, the river, the trees scattered on its banks, and the windy of the valley, as far as she could trace it with the light. As they passed into other rooms, these objects were taking different positions, but from every window there were beauties to be seen. The rooms were lofty and handsome, and their furniture suitable to the fortunate of the proprietor, and Elizabeth saw with admiration of his taste that it was neither grody or non-usually fine, with less of splendor and more real elegance than the furniture of Rosen, and of this place, thought she, I might have been mistress. With this room I might now have been familiarly acquainted. Instead of viewing them as strangers, I might have rejoiced in them as my own, and welcome to them as visitors, my uncle and auntie. But no, recollecting herself, that could never be. My uncle and auntie would have been lost to me. I should not have been allowed to invite them. That was a lucky recollection. It saved her from something like regret. She longed to inquire of the housekeeper whether her master were really absent, but had not courage for her. I learned, however, the question was asked by her uncle, and she returned away with alarm, while Mrs. Rollins replied that he was adding, but we expect him tomorrow with a large party of friends. But we expected we party of friends. How rejoiced was Elizabeth that their own journey had not, but any circumstances, be delayed a day. Her aunt now called her to look at a picture. She approached and saw the likeness of Mr. Wickham's among several other miniatures over the mantelpiece. Her aunt asked her smilingly, and she liked how she liked them. The housekeeper came forward and told them it was the picture of a young gentleman, the son of her late master's steward, who had been brought up by him at his own expense. He is now gone into the military, she added, but I'm afraid he has returned out very wild. Mrs. Gardiner looked at her niece with a smile, and Elizabeth could not return it. And that, said Mrs. Wat- no, Arnolds, pointing to another of the miniatures, is my master, and very like him. It was drawn at the same time as the other, about 8 years ago. I have heard much of your master's fine person, said Mrs. Gardiner, looking at the picture. It is a handsome face, but Lizzie, you can tell us whether it is like or not. Mrs. Rawlins' respect for Elizabeth seemed to increase on this intimation of her knowing her master. Does that young lady know Mr. Darcy? Elizabeth coloured and said a little. And do do not you think him a very handsome gentleman, ma'am? Yes, he very handsome. I'm sure I know none so handsome, but in the gallery upstairs you will see a finer, larger picture of him than this. This room was fa- a late master's favorite bedroom, and these miniatures are just as they used to be then. He was very fond of them. This accounted to Elizabeth for Mr. Wickham's being among them. Mrs. Rollins then directed their attention to one of Miss Darcy's, drawn when she was only 8 years old. And is Miss Darcy as handsome as her brother? Said Mr. Gardiner. Oh yes, the handsomest young lady that ever was seen, and so accomplished. She plays and sings all day. In the next room is a new instrument just come down for her, a present for my master. She comes here tomorrow with him, Mr. Gardner, whose manners were easy and pleasant, encouraged her communicativeness by his questions and remarks. Mrs. Rollins either from pride or attachment, had evidently great pleasure in talking to her master and her sister. Is your master much at Pemberley in the course of the year? Not so much as I could wish, sir. But I dare say he may spend half of his time there, and Miss Darcy is always down for summer months. Except, thought Elizabeth, when she goes to Ramsgate. If your sir would marry, she might see more of him. Yes, sir, but I do not know when that will be. I do not know who is good enough for him. Mr. and Mrs. Gardiner smiled. Elizabeth could not help saying, "It is very much to his credit, I am sure, that you should think so. I say no more than the truth, and what everybody will say that knows him," replied the other. Elizabeth thought that was going pretty far, and she listened with increasing astonishment as the housekeeper added, "I have never had a cross word from him in my life, and have known him ever since he was 4 years old." This was praise, of all others most extraordinary, most opposite to her idea that he was not a good-tempered man had been her firmest opinion. Her keenest attention was awakened. She longed to hear more and was grateful to her uncle for saying, "There are very few people of whom so much can be said. You are lucky in having such a master." "Yes, sir, I know I am. If I was to go through the world, I could not meet with a better. But I have always observed that they who are good natured with children, when children are good natured when they grow up, and was always the sweetest tempered, most generous hearted boy in the world." Elizabeth almost stared at her. "Can this be Mr. Darcy?" thought she. "His father was an excellent," said Mrs. Gardner. "Yes, ma'am, that he was indeed. His son will be just like him, just as affable to the poor." Elizabeth listened, wondered, doubted, and was impatient for more. Mrs. Rollins could interest her on no other point. She related the topic of the pictures, the dimensions of the rooms, and the price of the furniture in vain. Mr. Gardner, highly amused by the kind of family prejudice to which he attributed her excessive con- commendation of her master, soon led again to the subject, and she dealt with energy on his many merits as they proceeded together up the great staircase. "He is the best landlord and the best master," said she, "that ever lived. Not like the wild young men nowadays who think of nothing but themselves. There is not one of his tenants or servants that would give him a good name. Some people call him proud, but I'm sure I never saw anything of him. To my fancy, it is only because she does not rattle away like other young men. In what an amiable light does this please him," thought Elizabeth. "This fine account of him," whispered her aunt as they walked, "is not quite consistent with his behaviour to our poor friend. Perhaps we might be deceived. That is very likely. Our authority was too good. On reaching the spacious lobby above, they were shown into a very pretty sitting room, lately fitted up with greater elegance and lightness than the apartment below, and were informed that it was but just done to give pleasure to Miss Darcy, who had taken a liking to the room, and when at Pemberley, is certainly a good brother. He is certainly a good brother, said Elizabeth as she walked towards one of the windows. Mrs. Rowlands anticipated Miss Darcy's delight, and when she should enter the room. And this is always the way with him, she added, can give his sister any pleasure. Whatever can give his sister any pleasure, it is sure to be done in a moment. There is nothing he would not do for her. The picture gallery and tour of the principal bedrooms were all that remained to be shown. In the former were many good paintings, but Elizabeth knew nothing of the art, and from such as had been already visible below, she had willingly turned to look at some drawings of Miss Darcy in crayon. In crayons, in crayons, whose subjects were usually more interesting and also more intelligent. In the gallery, there were many family portraits, and they could have little to fix the attention of a stranger. Elizabeth walked on in request of the holy face whose features would be known to her. At last it arrested her, and she beheld a striking resemblance of Mr. Darcy, and such a smile over the face she remembered to have sometimes seen when he looked at her. She stood several minutes before the picture in the earnest com- compilation and returned to it again before they quitted the gallery. Mrs. Rawlins informed them that it has been taken in his father's lifetime. There was certainly at this moment in Elizabeth's mind a more gentle sensation towards the original than she had ever felt in the height of the acquaintance. The commendation bestowed on him by Mrs. Rowland was no trifling nature. What praise is more valuable than the praise of an intelligent servant? As a brother, a landlord, master, she considered many how many people's happiness were in his guardianship, how much of a pleasure or pain it was in his power to bestow, how much of good and evil must be done by him. Every idea that has been brought forward by the housekeeper was favourable to his character as she stood before the canvas on which he was represented, and fixed his eyes upon herself. She thought of his regards with a deeper sentiment of gratitude than it had ever raised before. She remembered its warmth and softened its impropriety of expression, and when all the house was open to general inspection had been seen, they returned downstairs and taking leave of the housekeeper were co-signed over the gardener who met them at the hall door. As they walked across the lawn towards the river, Elizabeth turned back to look again. Her uncle and auntie stopped also, and while the former was conjecturing as to the date of the building, the owner of itself himself suddenly came forward from the road which led behind it to the stables. They were within 20 yards of each other, and so abrupt was his appearance. It was impossible to avoid his sight. Their eyes instantly met, and the cheeks of each were overspread with the deepest blush. He absolutely started, and for a moment seemed unmovable from surprise, but shortly recovering himself, advanced towards the party and spoke to Elizabeth, if not in terms of perfect composure, at least of perfect civility. She had instantly turned away, but stopping on his approach, received his compliment with an embarrassment impossible to be overcome. Had his first appearance or his resemblance to the picture they had just been imagined been insufficient to assure the other two that they now saw Mr. Darcy, the gardener's expression of surprise on beholding his master must immediately have told them. They stood a little aloof while they were talking to their niece, who, astonished and confused, scarcely dared lift her eyes to his face, and knew not to what answer she returned to his civil inquiries after her family, amused amazed at the altercation in the manner since they had last parted. Every sentence that he uttered was increasing her embarrassment. Every idea of the impropriety of her being found there recurring on her mind, and the few minutes in which they continued together were some of the most uncomfortable her of her life. None did he seem more at ease. When he spoke, his accent had none of its usual sedateness, and he repeated his inquiries as to the time of her having left Longbourn, and of her stay in Derbyshire so often, and in so hurry hurried in a way as plainly spoke the distraction of his thoughts. At length every idea seemed to fail him, and after standing a few moments without saying a word, he sadly recollected himself and took a leave. The others then joined her and expressed their admiration of his figure. Did Elizabeth heard not a word, and fully engrossed by her own feelings, followed them in silence. She was overpowered by shame and vexation. Her coming there was the most unfortunate, the most ill-judged thing in this world. How strange must it appear to him! In what a disgraceful light must it not strike so vain in man! It might seem as if she had purposely thrown herself in his way again. Oh, did she come? Or why did he thought come a day before he was expected? Had they been only 10 minutes sooner, they should have been beyond beyond the reach of his discrimination. Discrimination, for it, it was a plain that he was arrive that moment alighted from her horse, and his courage. She blushed again over the perverseness of the meeting, and his behaviour so strikingly altered. What could it mean that he should even speak to her was amazing. That he should even speak to her was amazing, but to speak with such civility to inquire after the family, never in life had she seen his manner so little dignified. Never had he spoken with such gentleness as on this unexpected meeting. What a contrast did it offer to his last address in Rosen Park. When he put his letter into her hands, she knew not what to think, none how to account for it. They had now entered a beautiful walk by the side of the water, and every step was bringing forward a noble effort of ground, or a final reach of the woods to which they were approaching, and it was some time before Elizabeth was sensible of any of them, and though she answered mechanically to the repeated appeals of her uncle and auntie, and seemed to direct her eyes to such objects as they pointed out. She distinguished no part of the scene. Her thoughts were all fixed on one were all fixed on that one spot of Pemberley House, whichever it might be, where Mr. Darcy then was. She longed to know what at that moment was passing in his mind, in what manner he thought of her, and whether in defence of everything she was still dear to him. Perhaps he has been civil only because he felt himself at ease. Yet there had been that in his voice which was not like ease. Whether he had felt more of the pain or of pleasure in seeing her, she could not tell, but he certainly had not seen her with composure. At length, however, the remarks of her companions on the absence roused her, and she felt the necessity of appearing more like herself. They entered the woods, bidding to the river for while ascended some of the higher ground, whence in spots where the open trees gave the eye power to wander, were many charming view of the valley and the opposite hills, with a long range of wood overspanning many and occasionally part of the stream. Mr. Gardner expressed a wish of going round the park, and feared it might be beyond a walk. With my hands, yeah, so that I know that it's about. Okay, let's continue. Yeah, with a triumphant smile, they were told that it was 10 miles round. It settled the matter, and they pursued the accustomed circuit, which brought them again after some time a descent among hanging wood to the edge of the water in one of its narrowest parts. They crossed it by a simple bridge in character with the general air of the sea. It was a spot less adorned than any had yet visited, and the valley here constructed into a glen allowed room only for the stream, and narrow walk amidst the rough carpet road which bordered it. Elizabeth longed to explore its winding, but when they had crossed the bridge and proceeded distant from the house, Mrs. Gardiner, who was not a great walker, could go no further, and thought only of returning to the carriage as quickly as possible. Her niece was therefore obliged to submit, and they took their way towards the house on the opposite side of the river, in the nearest direction, but their progress was slow, and Mr. Gardner, though seldom able to indulge the taste, and was very fond of fishing, and was so much engaged in watching the occasional appearance and some 12 in the water, talking to the man about them, and he advanced but little whilst wandering on in this slow manner, they were again surprised, and Elizabeth's astonishment was quite equal to what had been at first by the sight of Mr. Darcy approaching them, and at no great distance. Being here had less the walk being here less shorter than one on the other side allowed them to see him before they met. Elizabeth, however, astonished, was at least more prepared for an interview than before, and resolved to appear to speak with calmness. If he really intended to meet them for a few minutes, indeed, she felt that he would probably strike into some other path. This idea lasted a, a returning while a returning in the walk concealed him from the view, and turning past, he was immediately before them. With a glance, she saw that he had lost none of his recent civility, and to imitate his politeness, she began as they met to admire the beauty of the place, but she had not got the beyond the words delightful and charming when some unlucky recollection obtruded, and she fancied the praise of Pemberley from her might be mischievously construed. Her colour changed, and she said no more. Okay, let's continue. Okay. Okay, let's continue. Mrs. Gardner was standing a little behind, and on her pausing, he asked her if she would do him the honor of introducing him to her friend. That was a stroke of civility for which she was quite unprepared, and she could hardly suppress a smile at his being now seeking the acquaintance of some of those very people against whom his pride had revolted in his offer to himself. What will be his surprise, thought she, when he knows who they are? He takes them now for the people of fashion. The introduction, however, was immediately made, and as she named their relationship to herself, she stole a sly look at him to see how much he bore it, and was not without the expectation of his decamping as fast as he could from such disgraceful companions. Sorry, that was a surprise by the connection, and was evident. He sustained it, however, with fortnights, and so far from going away, trying back with him and entered into conversation with Mr. Gardner. Elizabeth could not but triumphant. It was consoling that he should know she had some relation for whom there was no need to blush. She listened most attentively to all the past to that She listened most attentively to all that passed between them, and gloried in every expression, every sentence of her uncle, which marked his intelligence, his taste, and his good manners. The conversation soon turned upon fishing, and she heard Mr. Darcy invite him with the greatest civility to fish there as often as he chose, while he continued in the neighbor, offering at the same time to supply him with fishing tackles, and pointing out those parts of the stream which where there was usually most sport. Mrs. Garner, who was walking arm in arm with Elizabeth, gave her a look expressive of her wonder. Elizabeth said Elizabeth said nothing, but it gratified her exceedingly, and the compliment must be all for herself. Her astonishment, however, was extreme, and continuously was she repeating, "Why is he so altered? From what can it perceive? It cannot be for me. It cannot be my sake that his manners are thus, thus softened. My reproof as henceforth could not work such a change as this. It is impossible that he should still love me." After walking some time in this place, the two ladies in front and the two gentlemen behind, on resuming the places after descending to the blank of the river for the better inspection of some curious water plant, there chanced to a little altercation. It originated in Mrs. Gardner, who, fatigued by the exercise of the morning, found Elizabeth's arms indicate, indicate to her support, and coincidentally preferred her husband's. Mr. Darcy took her place by her niece, and they walked on together. After a short silence, the lady spoke. She wished him to know that she had been assured of his absence before she came to the place, and accordingly began by observing that his arrival had been very unexpected. "For your housekeeper," she added, "informed us that you will certainly not be here till tomorrow, and indeed before we left Bakewell we understood that you were not immediately expected in the country." He acknowledged the truth of it all, and said that the business with his steward had occasioned his coming forward a few hours before the rest of the party with whom he had been travelling. "They will join me early tomorrow," he continued. "Among them are some who will claim an acquaintance with them, Mr. Bentley and his sisters." Elizabeth answered only by a slightly bow. Her thoughts were instantly driven back to the time when Mr. Darcy's, ooh, I missed it. Okay, let me start from. They will join me early tomorrow," he continued, "and among them are some who claim an acquaintance with you, Mr. Bentley and his sister." Elizabeth answered by a slight bow. Her thoughts were instantly driven back to the time when Mr. Bentley's name had been last mentioned between them, and if she might judge from his complexion, his mind was not very differently engaged. "There is also one other person in the party," he continued after a pause, "who more particularly wishes to be known to you. Would you allow me, or do I ask too much, to introduce my sister to your acquaintance during your stay at Lambton?" The surprise of such an application was great indeed. It was too great for her to know in what manner she acceded to it. She immediately felt that whatever desire Miss Darcy might have been acquainted with her must be the work of her brother, and without looking further, it was satisfactory. It was gratifying to know that his resentment had not made him think really ill of her. They now walked on in silence, each of them deep in thought. Elizabeth was not comfortable, and was not comfortable was that was impossible, but she was flattered and pleased. His wish of introducing his sister to her was a compliment of the highest kind. They soon outstripped the others, and when they had reached the carriage, Mr. and Mrs. Gardner were half a quarter of a mile, and he then asked her to walk into the house, and she declared herself not try, and they stood together on the lawn at the same time. Much might have been said, and silence was very awkward. She wanted to talk, but there seemed an embargo on every subject. At last, we recollected that she had been travelling, and they talk of meatloaf and dovedale with a great perseverance. Dear Time and her auntie moved slowly, and her patience and her ideas were nearly worn out before the tea was over. On Mr. and Mrs. Gardner's coming out, they were all pressed to go into the house and take some refreshment, and this was declined, and they parted on each side of the utmost politeness. Mr. Darcy handed the ladies into the carriage, and when it drove off, Elizabeth saw him walking slowly towards the house. The observations of her uncle and aunt now began, and each of them pronounced him to be infinitely superior to anything they had expected. He is perfectly well behaved, polite and unassuming, said her sister. There is something a little stately in him, to be sure, replied her aunt. But it is confirmed to his that, and it is not unbecoming. I can now say with the housekeeper that though some people may call him proud, I have seen nothing of it. I was never surprised done by his behavior to us. It was more than civil, it was really attentive, and for such there was no necessity for such attention. His acquaintance with Elizabeth was very trifling. To be sure, Lizzie, said her auntie, he is not so handsome as Wickham, or rather, he has not Wickham's countenance, for his features are perfectly good. But how came how how came you to tell us that he was disagreeable? Elizabeth accused herself as well as she asked, said that she had liked him better when they met at Kent than before, and she had never seen him so pleasant as this morning. But perhaps he may be a little whimsical in his civilities, replied his uncle, her uncle. Your great men often are, and therefore I shall not take him at his word about fishing, as he might change his mind another day and warn me of his ground grounds. Elizabeth felt that they had entirely mistaken his character, but said nothing. From what we have seen of him, continued Mrs. Gardner, I really should not have thought that he could have behaved in so cruel a way by anybody as he has done by poor Wickham. He has not an ill nature look. On the contrary, there is something pleasing about his mouth when he speaks. There is something of dignity in his countenance that would not give one an unfavourable idea of his heart. But to be sure, the good lady who showed us the house did give him a most flaming character. I could hardly help laughing aloud sometimes, but he's a liberal master, I suppose, and that in it in the eyes of her servants comprehends every value virtue. Elizabeth here felt herself called on to say something in vindication of his behavior to Wakem, and therefore gave them to understand in as the a manner as she could that by what she had heard from his relation in Kent, his actions were capable of a very different construction, and that his character was by no means so faulty nor Wickham so amiable as they had been considered in Hertfordshire. In confirmation of this, she related the particulars of all the look up this word
Pecuniary.
pet,
Pecuniary.
pecuniary trans transactions in which they had been connected without actually naming her authority, but stating it to be such as might be relied on. Mrs. Gardner was surprised and concerned, but as they were now approaching the scene of her former pleasures, every idea gave way to the charm of recollection, and she was soon to engage in pointing out to her husband she had been all the interesting spots pointing out to her husband all the interesting spots in its environs to think of anything else. Fatigued as she had been by the morning's work, she had no sooner dined than she set off again in quest of her former acquaintance, and the evening was spent in the satisfactions of an intercourse renewed after many discontinuance. The occurrences of the day were too full of interest to leave Elizabeth much attention for any of these friends, and she could do nothing but think and think with wonder of Mr. Darcy's civility, and above all of his wishing her to be acquainted with his sister. Okay, guys, I'm done. Thank you. I'm so proud of myself. First of all, I'm very proud of myself, and I'm gonna read chapter 2, volume 2, chapter 2 tomorrow. Yeah, I'm very proud of myself, and I hope you guys have a nice day. Thank you so much for watching me, and I hope you guys have a nice day. Bye bye. Bye.